What's up guys? In today's question we need to swap some nodes in given pairs. Like if there are even number of nodes in a linked list, what we need to do is we need to swap the two adjacent pairs, that is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. What if an odd number of nodes are given, for example 1 2 3, we just need to swap 1 and 2 and 3 remains the same. Again, what if no nodes are given? We need to simply return the head as it was. What if only one node is given? We need to simply return the head. Okay, so firstly coming to the solution, what I first did is I checked for both the condition. What if head is next, or what if there's only one node and that is head? I returned the head. Next what I did is I took 2 pointers. I'll explain you why I had to take this third pointer, but let's just focus why I took the 2 pointers. First, in a while loop I checked for the condition if both of them are not null. Then what I did is, let me explain you with an example of 1 and 2 here. So consider this to be my linked list. Then what I have is I have a head that is pointing towards the first. Let me just open up my paint real quick, that way it would be much easier for you to understand here. Okay, so let's consider this scenario where I have, why isn't it increasing? Hey, yeah, I have 1 and I have another, it is pointing to 2 and I have another node. Now I have another node head which is pointing to my 1 right now. What I do in my code here is I first there what I do here is I first assign the value of t1 and t2 to be this. Why am I so comfortable with doing this is because I have already checked for the condition if head is not null, otherwise we would have gotten a null point exception here. Then so let me assign it, t1 is at this and t2 is at this. Now simply, if we just consider this small case, simply now what we have to do is here, oh shit, I'm so sorry, I'm coming in between the frame, I didn't realize that. Now it's better. What we simply need to check now is, what we need to simply do now is, let me explain it to you real quick, that t2 should be pointing to t1 here and t1 should be pointing to the next of t2 like this. So what I wrote down here is, yeah, I'm not in between the code, what I wrote down here is t1 dot next equals to t2 dot next. So t1 is pointing to t2 right now, but we already have the value of t2, so we do not need to worry about changing this pointer here. So we change this pointer to be equal to this pointer, which is in this case null. So now our linked list looks like this: 1, this 2, head is pointing here, t is pointing to null and t2 is also pointing to null, but there are 2 more pointers, t1 and t2, let's call them reference, we are working in Java, which are pointing to these both elements. Now what we want to do is we need to change the orientation of this 2. So the 2 should point to 1, so I simply wrote that t2 dot next should point to t1, and then I check for another condition if head is pointing to t1. So my node right now looks like this. Here 1, it is empty, this is t1, this is t2, and this is my head. I checked if my head is pointing to t1, then it should point to t2. Here again, coming back to the code, if head is pointing to t1, it should point to t2. Done. Now now let's consider this situation. Now what I want to do is, if let's delete all of this, if my linked list was this, why am I not having a pencil right now? 1 2 3 and 4, and after redoing my first loop, what my linked list looks like this, and this is t1 and this is t2. Now what I want to do is, I want t2 to point here and t1 to point here, but first I need to check if this exists or not. What if I only have this linked list? So I check if t1 dot next exists. here. I checked if t1 dot next is, I mean, if it does not exist, I simply need to return my head right now because it is pointing here. So returning head would return me to 1. I took care of this. Then what I did is, forget about this right now. Let's focus on this last two parts. So what I did right now is I changed my t1 to be equal to t2. Now this is equal to this. I know this for a fact because I checked the condition here is that t1 dot next, I mean this third element, is not null. Then what I did is I made my pointer t2 point to t1 dot next. Here I incremented my t1 from 1 to 3, then I incremented my t2 from 2 to 4 because my t1 was now pointing to the third element, but t1 dot next points to the fourth element. And what if our list was something like this? My t2 would point to null. Let's consider this to be null. My t2 would point here. My t1 is right now here. Okay, so I needed to do something. If this was null, what I did is before thinking of this p logic, I would simply run out of the loop and I would return head. Then in this condition it works fine because now I have 2, 1 and 3. Doesn't matter. Wait, I did a boo-boo. I think I wrote end here, but it should be or. If any one of them, we should break. I hope it still works with an or because my logic would be it does not. Oh, I'm so sorry, I wrote something there. I hope it works with an or, otherwise that my logic, it does not work with an or now, but it works with an and. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm using a not condition there. Now it works fine. Yes, it should be and. So t1 should not be null and t2 should not be null. That should be the condition, not anywhere else. So in this case t2 was null, and because it was null, this condition was violated. I came out of the loop, then I returned the head, and then my answer was this. Now coming back to our situation here, what if this was the scene? Now if this was the scene, I needed to swap them, and using the same code which is here, I swapped them, and now my list looked like 1, 3, 4, 2. Oh, sorry. Undo. It is 4. This is 3. But there's a slightest bit of problem there. What the problem is? My 2 is pointing to 1, correct? My 4 is pointing to 3, correct? And 3 is pointing to 4's next, that is null. All done. But I'm so sorry, I was again in the frame. Now I won't be right here. So in this case it was null, that's why it broke again. But my 1 is still pointing to this 3. If you noticed that I haven't changed it to my 4, and if I change it to my 4 directly, then there's a chance that it points to null. So what I did is I took another pointer p, I made it equal to t1. P is for previous. Now my previous is equal to t1. What I do just before this is this becomes t2 and this becomes t1. Then I force my p to point to t2. Done. That's all I needed. But in this case, my p is this. If I force my p to point to t2, it would be null. That's why I had another condition. If t2 is not null, then only point to this another node, point to the t2 node, otherwise don't point to the t2 node. And this was the solution. I'll quickly recap it. If there are only 2 elements, swap those 2 elements, and if it is the first element, remember to change the head. Simple as it is. Second, if there are 3 elements, swap the first 2 elements, check if the 4th element exists or not. If it does not exist, return. Again, if there are 4 or more than 4 elements, we are working on only 2 elements at a time, and we are checking for the 3rd and the 4th element later. So if there are 5, 7, 9 or any odd number of elements, then this process is same. Swap the first 2 elements, check if the fourth element exists or not. If it does not exist, return. If it exists, then keep a previous pointer. Remember to do that. Keep a previous pointer to your first node or the second node after swapping, and what you want to do is swap these two elements, swap the next two elements, and then change the location of your previous pointer's next pointer, and that's it. That is how you do this. It is pretty simple, and I hope I was able to explain this question. It took me like 10 minutes to form the logic. It's really basic question, I think. Thank you guys.